Greetings, this is Craddock. I'm really excited today to bring you this cold Vyr Archon wizard build. We are running this build for Torment 13, Nephilim Rifting, gold, key farming, etc. Going to be a really fun build to play in Rifts this season, especially since we get the grandeur bonus, which allows us to do pretty cool gear setup here. This will work without the grandeur bonus, it's just not quite as advantageous, so if you want to run this without the seasonal bonus, that is perfectly fine. 2.6.4 brings a buff to the Vyr 6-piece from 500% up to 100% per stack, and then of course you also gain defense per stack with the 6-piece as well. Armor attack speed resistances with the 4-piece, so we won't have to gear quite as much attack speed in this setup, especially since it isn't a lightning build. So one of the cool advantages of being a cold build means you get that built-in chill effect, helping you proc the trap gem multiplier more readily, and then you also don't have to wait around quite as much for paralysis procs to be able to decimate your enemies, as you would with a Manal based lightning build. But anyway, let's get into it. So the general idea of the setup here I'm running is Chantodos with Aether Walker. We have the Swami Fazula combo, of course, a very advantageous items for Archon, and then we're running maybe a little bit lower cooldown. But the cool thing here is the grandeur bonus does allow you to increase this a little bit, making the Archon resets more fluid and, in my opinion, much more enjoyable, making this build just excel in the upcoming season. But the general idea is that you have relatively high cooldown, but you won't be getting those instant resets as you would with an Ingeom, or perhaps with maybe the Gloves of Worship with that huge cooldown boost there. So we are using the Obsidian Ring to reset our Archon, so the gap in time that we have between Archon here is going to be filled by mostly Obsidian Ring procs, which reset our Archon. To ensure that Obsidian is proccing solely on Archon, we generally will only cast Slow Time maybe at the beginning of the Rift, and then after that we don't have to worry about it. Huge benefit here too with the Aether Walker, because this no longer triggers the cooldown on Calamity, meaning whenever we attack and hit enemies with either Arcane Torrent or Calamity, this will proc the Obsidian Ring solely on the Archon skill. Very big there. And then one of the other huge benefits here with the Aether Walker is that since we do have a lower cooldown than some of the other configurations might be able to attain, lower than 75% anyway, this item choice this cube choice is going to basically let you always have that 0.5 second Archon. Basically at 0.5 GCD, you're lowering the cooldown of teleport when in Archon form down to the base GCD, meaning you're able to get around the map as quick as possible with this build, even though we don't have as quite high cooldown as you would, say, with the Ingeom setup. Yeah, a lot of flat weapon damage increases here. So the Chantodos, every second while in Archon, you expel a wave of destruction, dealing damage. Every time you hit with an attack not in Archon form, we're going to stack up Chantodos stacks. So very important here is when you're out of Archon form to be hitting enemies as much as possible with your Arcane Torrent or your Calamity to stack up the Chantodos will. And then the other part of this is we're getting a lot of extra damage here from Mirinae. Interesting gem choice here. Actually works fairly well as a companion to the Chantodos, because we're resetting Archon at a little bit faster pace. We're not able to stack up the Chantodos up to its full 20 stacks every time. This is just going to be fact, and you're not going to want to wait that long. You're going to want to be engaging enemies. You're going to want to be killing them. You know, you're going to want to be clearing the rift, right? So we don't want to spend too much time outside of Archon, but increase the amount of Chantodos stacks that we can get. And these Mirinae here just provides that extra level of damage. We're attacking so fast in Archon form, 15 ticks per second at 5 APS with the beam, plus the extra blast that you get off when in Archon form, the Archon blasts, and then the punch if you're using the punch instead of the beam. These all have a fairly high proc coefficient when you consider the high attack speed of the build, and will proc Mirinae fairly often, and maybe not as much damage as wearing the Manal introduces, but it's still a nice companion to the Chantodos. And in situations where you say pick up a channeling pylon or maybe an empowered pylon that pushes your CDR higher, if you happen to accidentally go into Archon form too quick and not stack up your Chantodos enough, the Mirinae really helps out in these sort of situations, because it will still give you that extra damage that lets you decimate enemies without having to suffer too much. And cool thing about still, if you accidentally do go into Archon form early with the channeling or empowered pylon, you will gain more Vyr 6 stacks, so it sort of balances out a little bit in that regard. But regardless, it's just a really good companion, I feel, here for this middle gem slot. Let's see. To balance out attack speed, mentioned attack speed a few times, we are running attack speed on the weapon. I am advising running the Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac Warren, that way you can get that extra roll here. Not 100% required, but it does help out considerably, especially since we're opting for, in this last gem slot, something non-traditional, something other than Gogok, basically, right? So, and I did find, especially with the Leorics Crown, going Gogok here was a little bit too much, so I will advise, if you are intending to swap in a Gogok gem, to drop the Leorics Crown. But that's just my advice. To help boost attack speed, because we don't have the Gogok anymore, we are running the Stretch Time rune on slow time, giving us and our allies standing in the area of our slow time an extra 10% attack speed. Cool thing about this ability is that if you cast it on the ground and then go into Archon form and cast the slow time on the Archon form, each of those instances of slow time, they stack together, meaning that you can get up to 20% attack speed from the same skill, as long as you're standing in the bubble that's been placed on the ground, right? So you can use this to your advantage at the beginning of the rift by finding, if you can find a nice elite early on, just stand on that elite, pop the cast the bubble, go into Archon form, and then cast your bubble in Archon form as well. You will stack up your Vyr stacks quicker and get to that 5 APS level that much more easily, right? And you'll be able to, the momentum builds after that point, you deal more damage, you're able to kill enemies quicker, and then you just rock the rift, right? Anyway, it's pretty cool effect, pretty fun. Other gems, of course, going to be trapped for that large multiplier, and Boon of the Hoarder for the gold find, as mentioned earlier. Going to want to have a gold find focus in this build. Let's see. Now you may be thinking, attack speed here is going to be pretty difficult to balance resource with, since we're attacking so fast and our skill does cost 16 arcane power per, I believe that's per cast, right? So it's going to be a very high cost build indeed. As you can see here, 32 arcane power per second roughly. So having a skill such as Power of the Storm, I feel, is going to be best for the arcane power cost reduction, just to be able to deal with the resource cost. We also have the arcane power and crit on the source, of course. It's going to be very important as well. And the reason I went with Storm Armor, even though we don't have the Halo of Mirinae in the base setup here, is that it just felt like the most efficient way to balance resource out. You could, your options are maybe Astral Presence, you could go Familiar Arcanaut, those are both flat increases to regeneration. I felt those scaled very it was difficult to keep up with the scaling of the high attack speed Arcane Torrent here with those abilities and skills, and they weren't as impactful. And then you had the Magic Weapon Conduit. You could go Magic Weapon Conduit. You could also use the Arcane Power and Crit from wearing the Swami, perhaps, even. But I felt that those gave up either too much defense in the case of the helmet and losing the vitality, or if you're looking at the Magic Weapon Conduit, the huge defense that you can get from deflection at high APS is just amazing. I was seeing, you know, I wasn't even high HP, I was very low HP, and I was seeing up to 300k plus, you know, shield stacks just from attacking in Archon form. It's insane, right? But very cool interactions here at the high APS, but you have to balance that out, and I feel like just placing this one skill is very efficient at balancing that resource, right? Let's see. Cool thing here is if you do ever want to swap in the Halo of Carini, it's an easy swap. You don't have to swap all of your resource skills around and rebalance. It'll be really easy to do, so we can go over that in a little bit. I want to circle back now to a little bit about the interaction with Calamity, because I mentioned deflection and teleport. What happens here with deflection, if you don't know, is that when you're teleporting through the rift, this will also proc your deflection effect, and you still have shield stacks on your character, even though all you're doing is teleporting and moving through the rift, basically. This is a huge benefit, huge interaction that's going to help out for our defense as we're moving through the rift, as we don't even need to necessarily attack so much. And then if you're using your Archon blasts in addition to that, your shield stack as you're moving, of course, will be even more consistent. And then here, the Calamity also expels a little bit of weapon damage, as you can see, and also stuns enemies. This makes it such that with the Aether Walker, you can proc the Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac with Calamity. In addition, you can also gain extra shield stacks, or sorry, gain extra Chantodos stacks with the Calamity effect. So, because we have this, it's just an amazing synergy. You can get more damage by casting Calamity a couple times while channeling the Arcane Torrent. So what I'll typically do is when I exit Archon, I'll just hold down Arcane Torrent on the nearest target and then cast Calamity maybe 2-3 times at most and gain those extra stacks in damage when entering Archon again. It's just an amazing effect. And remember, Chantodos has that wave coming out around your character to help deal a nice AoE effect, you know, so anything near your character is going to be pretty much decimated or killed quicker by this effect. Things at range are going to be a little bit harder to hit. That's where the Mirinae also kicks in a little bit. Because we're chilling enemies and Mirinae also procs at range, this can help kill some of those low HP targets or damage intermittently targets at range that are past the range of the Chantodos wave. So I feel it's a large benefit here. There are some alternate options. I'll go over those in a bit, but just know serious, huge interaction here with the Calamity. The stun is also very nice. It defensively can also help out if you have considerable incoming damage from elites that are nearby. Whenever you're resetting Archon, can help to control them. Yeah, so Arcane Torrent, of course, chosen for its high proc coefficient, helping to return the most arcane power. There's also a nice synergy here with the Chantodos because it takes a short time. There's travel time with this projectile. I think it's a projectile. Anyway, there's travel time on the Arcane Torrent from the time you cast till the time it hits enemies, which means in regards to Chantodo, you can still have bolts in the air when you enter Archon form. And what happens when these bolts land and hit enemies while you're in Archon form? Well, they stack up more Chantodos. So you actually gain extra stacks after you enter Archon form from the bolts that are in the air, meaning when you go to stack up on the next rotation, you already have maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 extra stacks available to start at, meaning it just makes it a whole lot more efficient, I feel, as far as stacking up the Chantodos. Bonus there, and I've been consistently seeing somewhere in the range of, with this level of cooldown, anywhere from, I don't know, 10 to 15 stacks. Typically around 12 stacks is where I end up. It just depends what situation you're in at the time. I do opt here for this particular build. I am going to recommend the cooldown on the amulet. So as you can see here, we have cooldown pretty much everywhere you can place it. Shoulders, neck, hands, fingers, on the rings, the main hand, offhand, the helmet, plus the Leorics Crown, Paragon, and Evocation. You're all going to want that to get up to that 70% mark, right? So I felt the trade-off here with the elemental damage, while significant, was less impactful than not having the cooldown here. Cooldown lets you reset a little bit faster, keep up your Vyr 6 stacks a little bit easier, and also reset Archon resources a little bit easier to manage. It's just more fluid with the extra cooldown. If you want to try it out with without the cooldown on the amulet, you certainly can. And that is one of the amazing things about this build. It is super easy to put together. I mean, you don't have to have those perfect cooldown rolls at the beginning of the season. Advantages here are huge. You don't have to have perfect cooldown rolls just to get it working. You can gear it up better as you go. I feel like the placement of the items here, like wearing the Leorics Crown, is going to be a lot easier. Wearing the Obsidian Ring, a lot easier earlier in season. I feel like gearing in general with this build is going to be a lot easier to do than with a Manal Teal based build, having much fewer attack speed rolls required. It's just a very easy setup to get going in season, and it's one of the huge advantages here. Yeah, we will secondaries, of course, going for that gold find. Definitely going to want to increase the gold we're getting in season. The Avarice band, a huge impact here. We're also running the Boon of the Hoarder, also gives us a little bit of movement speed, which can help out, actually, for not only moving through the rift. Most of the time you're going to be using just teleport, straight teleport through the rift, but it's mostly comes into effect when you have to pick up items or go back for a legendary, or maybe juke a little bit to help pick up a progress orb or something. Clicking a pylon, that movement speed is going to help out. So that's the important thing here. Defense with this build was really hard to balance. I'm not going to lie. I felt like I was having a hard time. I did test it out in T13, and I was dying a little bit considerably at my lower Paragon testing setup. So what I've opted for here is to go Blur in the optional passive slot. If you really want to swap this out, you can for something else, a more offensive ability, or even possibly Illusionist for even more move speed. Something like this, Astral Presence for more resource buffer, also very good. So you have a lot of options for this passive slot if you truly want to swap it out. But in the end, I just feel like to balance the build defensively, you're going to want to go for Blur. This also allows you to maintain your Endless Walk damage multiplier bonus considerably easier, because you don't feel the need to have to dodge any projectiles, any attacks from enemies, as many attacks from enemies. You don't feel the need to have to manually move around more than just using casting teleport, Archon teleport, or the Aether Walker based teleport, right? So huge benefit there defensively. Yeah, and there is a lot of position here for swaps, so if you really want to swap out the Mirinae, you can go for either the Gogok of Swiftness, or possibly even the Bane of the Powerful would be a really big benefit here with the elite damage and the extra multiplier, of course. But in the end, I just felt like Mirinae was the way to go. I mean, the problems. So we've heard the benefits with this build. Huge benefits here. The downsides, of course, as you can see, there's no room because we have to pretty much want to go with the Leorics Crown. There's not a lot of room for, you can't fit in sages with Vyrs. Broken Crown can be fit in, but at, in my opinion, a considerable cost. You do have to swap out the, I think the best way to go if you want to fit in Broken Crown is to swap out the gem here for the Gogok of Swiftness, so you'd lose the Mirinae. But that's still a fairly good setup, but I felt the consistency of the Leorics Crown was very nice with this setup. You didn't have to, you didn't drop Gogok when entering, changing rift levels, when going in between certain desolate areas in the rifts. So that was a nice benefit of the Leorics Crown. The consistency of the cooldown there. One of the downsides here, though, is that because we're using the Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac, you depend on finding enemies. The Aether Walker, of course, should allow you to do this in a quick fashion, but we only have a limited arcane power pool, so we can only really use Calamity so many times before we're out of arcane power when we're in non-archon form. So if you can't find an enemy within, say, 5 teleports, you're pretty much SOL, right? You're pretty much out there hanging out in the rift, just having fun, right? But this usually isn't an issue when in solo play, but it could be an issue when in group, right? Because if you are not the front runner in your group rift, and you've got some monk or maybe a demon hunter that's clearing faster than you are, this is a very quick build, but is it as fast as monk? Probably not, right? So if you've got another class that is outpacing you in a Nephilim Rift for whatever reason and isn't leaving a little trash behind, then it can be problematic as far as resetting Archon. One of the benefits, though, on the other side, the flip side there, is that because we don't opt for Bane of the Powerful or the Engiam, we don't have to worry at all about killing the entire elite pack in this setup. It's very freeing. It feels very free and easy, not having, just being able to dive in and snipe the yellow, right? Snipe the yellow elite and then just move on without even worrying about the extra adds there. Anyway, that's pretty much my take on the advantages and disadvantages of this setup. I think the advantages outweigh the disadvantages, but this particular build felt like the damage potential was a lot more, but you had to kind of work a little bit for it. So in terms of laziness, I would say this is a more engaging build. You're going to have to be actively playing it, actively managing it, but it is so much fun to play. It's totally worth playing this build. You should definitely try it out. It is insanely fun to play. So the downsides here with sages, not being able to slot sages, is pretty big disadvantage there, but I feel like, you know, with the utility to fit in the Broken Crown, this may be a good option to go for, especially since the Vyr 6-piece is the starting set, the Hadrug's Gift this season. So very, very nice, very nice. So a few gameplay tips. I've already mentioned the double stretch time tip for the first elite in the Rift. Didn't mention that you should also try and keep up stretch time as much as possible when inside Archon form. Remember to cast that bubble. It's helpful for helping proc trapped, slowing projectiles. It also gives you that extra attack speed from the stretch time bonus while in Archon form, boost your attack speed throughout the Rift. But as mentioned, when you're outside of Archon, past that point in the Rift, remember to definitely not cast stretch time because you want the Obsidian Ring to procs to aid the Archon reset, not the slow time reset. When you are resetting the Archon, you typically can cast Calamity maybe 2-3 times when outside Archon before you start running out of resource while you're channeling the Arcane Torrent. The difficulty here is managing when to use certain abilities. So if you come out of Archon form and there aren't any enemies nearby, do not cast your Arcane Torrent. You want to wait until you get nearby enemies, because you will need that arcane power to travel, right? Travel across the rift to seek out new enemies. Very important there. So management of arcane power can come into play even with the cost reduction here. Yeah, defense with the Endless Walk, as mentioned. Try not to wiggle around too much, or you'll sacrifice too much multiplier. That said, I found that every now and again on T13, having just a little bit of extra defensive buffer was okay to have via the Endless Walk set, because there's just a lot of damage, incoming damage, and the build itself, especially at lower stack count, doesn't have that much innate defense to run with, right? So just to keep in mind that scaling with the 6-piece, since it's there are a lot of mechanics here that are like proc-based weapon damage percent mechanics. Those are going to scale very well with your 6-piece, but they will also scale downward as well. If you don't have as many stacks, you will deal less damage. To that end, I recommend when you are ramping up at the start of the rift to use the Archon Punch, maybe, if at all possible, on that first elite or first couple of enemies, just to get more consistent attack speed increase. And then after that first rotation, you can start using the beam. Pretty much you can use the beam as much as you want after that point. The only time you might want to use the punch is if you have like a really closely clustered pack of blues or something you want to take down really quickly and focus those extra obsidian Mirinae procs on that little cluster, right? The Audacity here does help out in that regard, so getting close to your main target, your main elite, will be important if you want to deal the most damage to them, so just keep that in mind. Of course, the damage from the blast itself, the Archon blast that you have to cast on the #1 skill slot, is very important as well. That helps to freeze enemies as well, so when you're inside Archon form, it will freeze enemies and keep them CC'd, keep them from dealing damage to you. Very important. So anyway, just a few gameplay points. So really quick here, let's go over some of the alternate build setups that I sort of put together on the sheet here. You can reference these if you want. I put together a greater rifting variation. You can either opt for the Stone of Jordan, which would give you more element, cold element or elite damage at the cost of some crit. But it would be a more consistent offensive variation. Remember here we're going for smooth, low greater rifting, so this would be for like quick gym ups and that sort of thing. And then the Carini here probably would be my favorable swap, just because you wouldn't have to worry as much when you're going through the rift. Very easy to fit this in for a greater rifting setup. And then of course with the greater rifting setup, you're going to want to swap out some of those gold percent secondaries with pickup radius, just to make picking up the orbs in the rift very smooth, right? I've got a secondary setup here that I was testing out on stream. This is the elite damage setup. So as opposed to the setup we've been covering, this build is like an instant Archon reset variation. We are using the Injam in this alternate variation, and the cool thing about this one was the mobility. I felt it was highly mobile, especially with the Cosmic Strand. If you don't know, this gives the ability of the Archon teleport the effect of the wormhole, so you can double jump when in Archon. With it removes the cooldown on the Archon teleport for 1 out of every 2 teleports, which is amazing. And you don't, the cool thing is you don't even have to you put teleport on your bar. All you have to do, I found this out in testing, is wear the Cosmic Strand and your Archon teleport will gain that effect, right? So I did find overall having teleport on the bar for this variation was worth going after, just because you have to consider getting around a town is also very important. You know, you don't want to be stuck, you know, running around town as much, going from the stash to the armory, etc. stash to the crafting stations, taking a longer time. But this was a very slick setup, very high elite damage. So we're running the Stone of Jordan in combination with the Furnace here for 80 plus elite damage, of course. And then we're running the Black Hole spell steal. So the idea here is you pop out of Archon, you cast your Black Hole maybe once or twice, gain that extra elemental damage on top of what we already have here, and then that sort of makes up for not going element on the amulet as well. And then we've got the Leorics, similar to the other build a little bit. And yeah, it was a very smooth setup as well. Going for crit here because it's a pain enhancer. We'd include pain enhancer in the build. Similar idea, you know, with the dot damage just helping out. But the additional thing here with the pain enhancer is it also helps out with attack speed. So ramping up that attack speed earlier on in the rift or in case you die is very important, and just maintaining those higher attack speed levels throughout the rift can be very nice. That's why I felt like pain enhancer would be a good option for this setup especially. So if you're looking for something that resets Archon instantly, maybe a more traditional setup with the Ingeom, this could be something you can try out, definitely. If you are hardcore, if you're a hardcore variation, what I would do is you have a couple of options. You could either swap out the Endless Walk and place the Halo of Mirinae and keep the Avarice Band, or you could simply swap out the Avarice Band and place the Halo of Mirinae here, and then gear for pickup radius. So not the best options there for hardcore, but it's doable. If you want to run this build in hardcore, you certainly can, right? And then I had some alternate variations with the elite damage setup, possibly running the Gloves of Worship and swapping out items. Like you could swap into the Bane of the Powerful, you could swap the elite damage back in, you could possibly even swap in a different weapon, right? So had some ideas going on the brain, but for the most part, I'm more happy with the Chantodos setup. I feel like the scaling of the Chantodos is much more capable as opposed to the elite damage setup that I put together here. So anyways, yeah, I'm very happy with this build. I hope you enjoy it in season, and I hope you've enjoyed this guide. Yeah, take care.